All right, we are live off the rip, the Week 12 college football show here at Beef Up Front. The latest college football rankings just came out, so we're going live streaming for that. We have the new look 12 team bracket, as if it would be if the bracket started today, this is what it would be. And Joe, tell the listeners what you just said before we went live.
I mean, if that doesn't make you horny, I don't know what will. Like Portnoy tweeted it out like when the first bracket came out last week. Like that's erotic. Like that, I can't believe how long it took us to get to this point, and how many people still are like, I don't like this. How can you not like that? How can you not like potentially Notre Dame going to Tennessee, Indiana football hosting Alabama football in a playoff game? Like I just don't know how you can look at this and be like, ew, not for me. Like, that's gross. That's awesome. That's unreal. I can't believe that. And, like, we'll get into it in a second. I was just like, Coyle, you and I were texting before this. Georgia being out as of today, like, so much stuff in the rankings that came out that I was, like, surprised. I was, like, genuinely, like, my jaw dropped when I saw Georgia would be out as of today. Miami still being where they are in the rankings, not in the seating, I thought was a little high, but let's get into it. I can ramble on for 20 minutes. Let's get into the show.
Yeah, I guess to the starting point, I think would be Georgia. Coming into the year, I'm not going to say crucified, but I definitely was in the minority where I had Georgia as a two-loss team. This year, I said their three toughest games on the road: Ole Miss, Texas, Alabama. I said I think that they would lose two of those three games. That prediction has came true, and now they're on the outside looking in. But they do have Reese Davis was just saying, the number one strength of schedule in the country. So push comes to shove at the end, just say Indiana does lose that game to Ohio State next week. Do you put a two-loss Georgia team in over that Indiana team? I think that becomes a debate, because who has Indiana played? Who has Indiana really beaten? They beat a big brand in Michigan, but what is that saying about the Michigan team this year? Tennessee, we'll talk about it this week, but Tennessee plays Georgia. Nico, I haven't seen that he's officially out yet, but I've seen that it's likely that he's not going to play with concussion. But what if Tennessee loses that game to Georgia, and then it's a two-loss Tennessee versus two-loss Georgia, but Tennessee didn't have their quarterback? I think Georgia is the most interesting team in the conversation at this point.
Yeah, cool. I agree 100%. And kind of like what you were saying, like if Georgia does win this weekend, whether Tennessee has Nico, well, especially if they don't have Nico, they win out, but they don't make it to the SEC championship game. So then they're sitting there at 10-2. Then you are putting a Georgia up with most likely a one-loss Indiana, a two-loss Tennessee. I mean, you're looking, Miami. Who knows if let's say Miami loses in the ACC championship game, two-loss Miami, but Miami at least made it to the conference championship game. What do you do there? Let's say BYU goes 12-0, loses to Colorado in the Big 12 title game. You're going to put a BYU team that, if they go undefeated at the rate they're at, they're sixth right now in the poll. They potentially be in the top four. They lose one game. What, you're going to drop them from 4 to 13 and have them miss the playoff entirely? Like, it's going to be very interesting to see as these next couple of weeks go on. And I think this weekend is massive. Obviously, I didn't think this was going to necessarily be an elimination game between Tennessee and Georgia, but it very well could be, especially if Tennessee, we'll get into that game in a minute, but if Tennessee does go in there and win, Georgia's done, which no one had in the beginning of the season. Like, I thought, they maybe lose a game or two. I think when we did our preseason predictions, I had Georgia winning the SEC, but I had them with two losses. But no one, including myself, would have expected them to just be completely on the outside looking in. I think that would be stunning if that were, to happen. But we can get into the games now, or unless you want me to address the nation after last week.
No, we talk a little bit more about this real quick, but I heard McElroy was saying as well, like, look at some of these matchups, like potentially Alabama going to Bloomington, Indiana in December. That is a environment that they're not used to. Ole Miss traveling to State College potentially. That's a environment that they're not used to. Tennessee hosting Notre Dame would be a pretty crazy one in its own right there. But I think, like, once again, though, if you're like Ohio State, you're like, wow, I really kind of like my path there. Like I got to get past Boise State. It's easier said than done. But then I would think they're probably close to a 10-point favorite over Miami. But like the thing I'm most curious about is how much the conference titles play a role and play a factor into these type of things. Like I feel like you can't penalize a team if they lose 3 games because the losses in the conference title game. Like if just say if Texas A&M makes it there, obviously if they have a third loss, they won't be getting in. But and obviously if they win that game, they do get in. But there's certain teams like, all right, if Oregon or if Ohio State goes back to the Big Ten title game and loses to Oregon, like you can't leave the 2-loss Ohio State out, or it gets really interesting if Indiana says beats Ohio State, and then you have a Big Ten title game of Indiana and Oregon. Does Ohio State even make the playoff at that point? Is Penn State sitting there at 11-1 and with no real quality wins? Are they safely in? Like I think my most surprising team that I saw was I see Penn State here is obviously 6 in the bracket, but they were seeded 4 or ranked 4th in the top 25, which I thought means like they're firmly in, and their last 2 games are Purdue and Minnesota. You have to figure they're probably double-digit favorites in both of those games. So like, is Penn State in at 11-1? And what if you had a undefeated Oregon versus an undefeated Indiana? Is Penn State and Ohio State just sitting there like, okay, we're both in with 2 losses to Ohio State and 1 loss to Penn State?
Yeah, or like let's say in that scenario, Indiana gets smashed. Like Oregon beats the shit out of them. Are you going to drop Indiana below a Penn State team who's, they were saying a best win is Illinois at home? Like, it's going to be very interesting because, we've seen a couple years ago when TCU had their 12-0 run, they lose in overtime to Kansas State, and they didn't even move from number 3. They stayed at 3. They played Michigan. They ended up going to the national title game. We obviously saw what happened in that national title game, but it's going to be very interesting to see going forward, Coyle. You said it with these conference championship games because I don't know really how much emphasis they're going to put on them or not. Because unless you have a team with like 2 losses, like we were saying, if a team is sitting there at 12 and they lose, at that point, okay, if the conference championship game, they probably would have been out anyways. So that would make sense. But it's going to be interesting with these teams towards the top, like. Indiana, like you were just saying, right now sitting there, I think they'd be seated 6th or 7th. I know they have the home game.
7th against Alabama.
Yes, they'd be seated at 7. They go undefeated and lose a game. So now what, they lose out on a home playoff game because they were good enough to make it to their conference championship game? Like, I think that's going to be definitely another thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of staring down the barrel of a 10-2 team from the SEC being on the outside looking in. Whether it's say Texas loses to Texas A&M, or the loser of this, or the winner of Georgia Tennessee, like I think will most likely go. But to say like Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, I think that would be the only 6, but all 6 of those go 10-2. Are all of those teams making it? Like, I don't think so. I think at least one of those teams is probably on the outside looking in, and it's going to be chaos again. It's going to be chaos again. They thought they fixed the chaos, but they definitely didn't. There's going to be the gripes. There's going to be the whatever you want to call them, the disagreements. It's going to be pretty wild. But I guess anything to wrap up the top 25 here, or just the bracket in itself before we head into to week 12, where we're saying not the greatest slate. If you wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about this, would be happy to do that. But
yeah, I mean, Coyle, we kind of hit everything, where we need to. I think it's interesting where the committee seems to really be valuing these head-to-head wins. Like Kansas State being over Colorado, I was a little surprised. I know, we're going down the bracket a little bit, maybe outside the playoffs right now, but I thought that was a little bit interesting because I think Colorado's just been playing much better than Kansas State lately. Kansas State having that loss to Houston is real bad. I know Colorado's loss to Nebraska isn't great either, but and another
that doesn't matter though. Like when you're in the Big 12, I mean, obviously for your total record, but
Yeah, no, I was just like, I was gonna like go down like, you have LSU, but then like LSU losing to South Carolina, you have South Carolina ahead of them, like, but then Louisville's ahead of Clemson, who has one less loss. Like, it's just interesting looking at how the committee's doing that with some of these teams. And one team to keep an eye on as like a team that is very much still alive is Washington State, sitting there at 8-1. I know they don't have the auto bid because of what's going on with the Pac-12 this year, and it's only them and Oregon State. But if they go 11-1 and some of these teams keep losing, you might all of a sudden see Washington State sneak in there as an 11 or a 12 seed. I think if Boise wins out, they might get a little bit higher than 12, but you could see a Washington State team still sitting there if chaos ensues. Like, there's a lot of teams that are still alive, and I think these next 3 weeks, and the one thing, Cole, you and I have talked about ever since they announced this, it's going to elevate the games between. You might have a week where it's number 24 versus number 21. Normally, we'd still talk about that as one of the biggest games of the weekend, but in the grand scale with the 14 playoff, it was kind of, well, this has no effect on the postseason, which is, not the best way to think, but it just is what it is. Now, this game means everything for that playoff race and staying alive. So I'm very, very excited to see how the rest of this season plays out.
All right, Joe. Well, hate to do it to you, but I definitely haven't had the best college season here on the show. It's been definitely up and down. A lot of upsets, but I think you always say it. You root for the chaos. That's what you want. Have some fun. But last week, Joe, tell the people what your record was.
So overall, I was 0-6 straight up, which is really hard to do. A complete 0-6 goose egg. 1-5 against the spread. I went 1-5 on my totals. Memphis couldn't fucking hang on against Rice. I was watching that game Friday night by myself. My girlfriend already fallen asleep. I'm sitting up yelling at her TV like a lunatic. No one in the house is awake at 1 a.m, watching fucking Rice march down the field with a minute left and scored. I lose by the hook there. LSU was an embarrassment. Meanwhile, the dog I said of Missouri ended up winning outright, and I didn't pick them. But that all adds up to 2-18 overall. The worst you and I have done in the 5, however many years we've been doing the show now, in football or basketball. I mean, not even close. I've had some weeks where I've been like 6-12, 7, and 11. Not
I
great.
went 8-12 this week,
and you finished 6 games ahead of me. It's terrible, 2-18. I'm glad I didn't bet that many of the picks that I had on the show in real life. But oh my God, you just texted me. I think it was like Monday or Sunday. You were just like, you did something that no one's ever done in beef history. And I knew right away it was bad. I didn't remember my picks. I'm like, this like, what did I go over? I mean, 2-18 is god awful. I will definitely be bouncing back this week. I guarantee I will have at least 3 wins this week. I guarantee improvement this week because this year, even before this, at least on the show, my worst year picking ever. There have been majority of the weeks I'm either hovering around 500, maybe I'm a game or 2 up. Normally I've been a little bit below 500, but this year, very, very bad. A lot of chaos, which is, great for college football. We just had that whole talk about how many teams are really still in the hunt for the playoff. But picking wise, I am terrible. And 2-18 is comically bad. I'd rather go 0-20 at that point than 2-18 because at least we can laugh about the goose egg, but that is brutal.
Well, as you always say, the chaos, the upsets, because it wasn't like you picked all favorites last week. There were some upsets obviously mixed in with Ole Miss. I don't think Bama obviously with the point spread wasn't an upset, but I feel like a lot of people were on LSU in that game. Last week was a wacky week, but we go into week 12, as we say each week. It's getting upsetting. You see the number raise each week, obviously, but that means we're also getting closer to the playoff. You can take that with what you will. Not a very intriguing slate this week. Like maybe if you do want to spend the girlfriend time or take someone out on a date this weekend, this might be a good time to do it, especially with the news that we got about Nico potentially not playing. But we'll dive into it. There are some big ones. Like I think BYU has some of the most eyes on them this week with the way that they've played in recent weeks. Kansas State needs to win to stay in the mix. Tulane, we just saw them get bumped into the top 25. They're still alive for the G5. So we still got some big games to get into. And we start out at noon on Saturday in the ACC. Clemson in the new rankings comes out at number 20. They are 7-2. They travel to Pitt to play the 7-2 Panthers, unranked. Just a couple weeks ago, this was being looked at as an ACC elimination type game. Pitt then goes to lose to Virginia last week. But Clemson, a 10-point favorite, over under 54.5, Joe. Do you like the Tigers to stay in the race in this one? They are still mathematically alive in the ACC.
Yeah, Coyle, I am going to go with Clemson here. Pitt, realistically, if they were to win this game, would kind of keep themselves, alive as well, because Clemson and Miami are currently, second place with that one loss right now. But I don't think Pitt is really that good of a team. Losing to Virginia kind of really said a lot about them this year. Kind of like a lot of Narduzzi teams. They're going to play teams tough, but they just don't, they had Kenny Pickett the one year they ended up winning the ACC in like the worst year ACC wise. Like it was, I think, them and Wake Forest for the ACC title game that year. But I like Clemson here 28-22. They'll keep it close. Pitt, they're going to have a big crowd. It is still a ranked Clemson team coming to town. So I'll take Pitt to plus 10. Like the under here, but I think this is going to be one of those games. It'll be close on the scoreboard, but I think Clemson's going to control. Ultimately, I just think Dabo is never going to have this team. I know with DJ, they were kind of real bad, but the roster is good enough to keep them afloat against these teams. Like I think they'll beat Pitt. I think they'll beat the Citadel, and I think that'll end up being essentially an elimination game between them and South Carolina at the end of the season. I think they'll get it done here, but it's not going to be pretty. They're going to have to really grind this one out, which I think they'll be able to do. So I'm going to go with Clemson there.
Yeah, Clemson enters this one at 6-1 in the ACC, very much alive. I do think, though, at the end of the day, that the ACC is definitely going to just be a one big league, whether that's Clemson, SMU, or Miami. Those kind of look like the three teams. As we talked about, Pitt 3-2 in the conference, with this being their last-ditch effort, needing some chaos to go to the ACC title game. If they don't win here, that they have legitimately no chance. But if they win here, maybe get some chaos, they could have a chance. Both teams are desperate, though. We're talking about it. We're no room for slip-ups, which is why I think we see a very close battle, highly contested battle. I think Pitt's able to keep it within the number. I think that they've looked good in spurts, and I think Narduzzi's able to kind of get them up for this one, especially at home. I think it's going to be a lower scoring defensive game, but I'll go Clemson to pull out the win at the end. Give me Clemson 24, Pitt 17. So Pitt plus 10 and under 54.5 there. All right, our G5 game of the week in the American Conference, number 25, Tulane at 8-2 at Navy, who is 7-2. Noon kick as well on ESPN2. Tulane 6.5-point favorite, over under 54.5. Joe, what are your thoughts on this matchup? And ever since Notre Dame put that beat down on Navy a few weeks ago, they haven't looked the same.
Yeah, Coyle, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I'm going to go with Tulane here pretty big. I'm going to take them 42-27. I'm going to take a minus 6.5. I'm going to pick the over, probably something I'll stay away from, as I usually do with how terrible I am. The one thing that I'm consistent with when it comes to college football is I cannot tell you an over-under. But I'm going to go with Tulane here. I just think roster-wise, talent-wise, they're better. Navy kind of outperforming, ever since that Notre Dame game. Coyle, I do agree they haven't looked great. They beat a South Florida team last week who a couple weeks ago was getting into a fist fight with their own players on the sideline. So take that win how you will. USF sitting at 2-3 in the AAC, not great. They do get to host Tulane, which is big. I'm expecting a really good crowd, but I think Tulane is a really good football team, a couple plays away from potentially being undefeated and being right in that mix for a top 15 rank. Them sitting there at 25 really shows the respect the committee has for them. So I'm going to go with the green wave here big. Hope it's a little bit closer just because, Cole, you said it best, the slate isn't exactly to die for. But I think Tulane, at the end of the day, just a better team. They'll get it done. They'll be able to stop the triple option.
Yeah, so both Army and Tulane clinch a spot in the AAC title game this week if Tulane wins versus Navy. So if Tulane wins this, we'll have Army Tulane in the American, and who knows, that could be for the spot in the college football playoff. We'll just have to see a few weeks, but Tulane's still alive for the playoff. I think Army definitely has a more of an uphill climb, and Tulane's probably going to need Boise to slip up in one of these coming weeks. But their two losses to Oklahoma, which obviously doesn't look great, but still you're challenging yourself with an SEC school, and then Kansas State, which was a pretty close game, and Tulane might have got robbed at the end on an offensive pass interference, I believe it was, down at the goal line that wound up making them lose that game. But Tulane has been rolling teams in American play. They're winning by an average margin of 30.8 points per game. And they also have a victory over Louisiana, who I thought maybe was going to sneak into the top 25, but they're looking like the best team in the Sun Belt and one of kind of the long shot contenders as of right now for the playoff. Navy has struggled, as I said at the beginning, since that Notre Dame beat down a couple weeks ago, coupled it with a loss against Rice last week. Tulane needs to dominate this one. I think they just need to continue to run up the scoreboards, make their resume more and more intriguing each week. I think they're going to beat Navy in pretty resounding fashion on Saturday. I'll go 35-20, so Tulane minus 6.5 over 54.5. But I think that's like a late touchdown by Navy. I don't think this game's ever in question, and Tulane really controls it from start to finish. All right, one of my favorite games I think that we've done this season definitely fits into the category of nobody would have thought this would be one of the games of the week, and that's number 16 Kansas State at 7-2, hosting number not even ranked, but Arizona State at 7-2. Just seeing them at 7 wins in general, they could have been 7-5. I still would have been surprised. But K-State hosts Arizona State this weekend. K-State 8.5-point favorite, over under 50.5. 7:00 kick on ESPN. Joe, do you think the Sun Devils can continue the kind of their Cinderella season and pull off the upset here?
If this game was in Tempe, I would say yes. But this game being at Kansas State, I think is kind of all there is, like all that there is to it. I'm going to go with Kansas State 27, Arizona State 20. I think Arizona State will cover. I think they're a very good team. And I think they're a team on the rise. Kenny Dillingham, he's an Arizona State alum, right, Coyle?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, because I remember I forget which team they beat when they rushed the field, but he was sitting there saying, like, I used to be one of these guys, like, partying, rushing the field and stuff. So that's really awesome to see a guy at his alma mater. I hope he's one of those guys that will stay. And if a bigger program comes calling, maybe he shies him away a little bit, because I think Arizona State, you can really build up and have a really solid football program. And seeing them at 7-2 is awesome. If they were to pull off the upset, they would absolutely be ranked next week. And they're a team that's not mathematically dead either. We were just talking about Penn a little bit. They're 4-2 along with Kansas State in the Big 12. Colorado has the one loss. Colorado pushes a loss. I have no clue what the tiebreakers would be. But Arizona State's still alive for a college football playoff berth, even if it's slim. So I think it's going to be a really good game. Ultimately, I just think Kansas State is a little bit better. And this game being at home, Coyle, like I already said, I just think Avery Johnson, is a little bit better at the QB spot. And I'm going to kind of roll with the guy I trust more and take Kansas State, maybe a late drive to seal this one away and win the game 27-20, like the under in this game. So bet the over.
Yeah, you were kind of touching on it, but I don't think Arizona State has gotten nearly enough buzz. Like, I know Indiana's a different story. For what Colorado's done, Deion turning around, that's kind of a different story, more popular. But Arizona State's sitting there at 7-2. Expectations, I think, if you look at their win total preseason, was 3 or 4 win team. And with Kenny Dillingham only being 34 years old in year 2 at his alma mater, having the Sun Devils at 7-2 and still alive in the Big 12 here in the middle of November, that's a pretty awesome story. And one of my favorite players in all of college football. And Arizona State's been a weird team that's been like on Thursday night games, Friday night, like late Saturday night. They're like kind of been like a better special, like just the game's on, you bet it because it's one of the last games on or the only games on. So I've watched weirdly a lot of Arizona State football this year. And Cam Scatterbo, the running back, is one of the more fun players. Yeah, a pure beast, like a Peyton Hillis like dude. But he missed last week with an injury. Is he back this week against a much tougher K-State opponent than UCF was for Arizona State last week? I think obviously that's going to determine if they can win this game. I think it's kind of baked into the line a little bit already because I think K-State would probably be more of like a touchdown favorite, um, more so than almost a 10-point favorite in this game. Uh, I think K-State just at home is going to be a little bit too much. I think their roster construction and just the way that they're built up front is just a little bit ahead of Arizona State right now, to be quite simple. I think they end Arizona State's kind of Cinderella run to potentially go into the Big 12 title. And I think Kansas State finds a way to get this one done and wins at home. I'll go K-State 30, Arizona State 20. So K-State minus 8.5 and under 50.5. All right, as we said at the beginning, not that many great games this week. So let's give a little bit more love to Boise State. They come into this one at 13, ranked 13th, but they are seeded 12th. They are the G5 representative for the playoff as of this moment. They are 8-1, and they will travel to San Jose State, 6-3. I think the second time we've talked San Jose State this year. 7:00 kick on CBS Sports Network. Boise State, 13.5-point favorite, over under 61.5.
I'm going to go with Boise here, 45-28. So if I'm doing my math correctly, which I'm not, I'm going to take Boise to cover that spread. I put San Jose State to cover. I'm going to take Boise to cover the 13.5. I like the over in this game. I just think it goes back to Genty, and that's kind of been my analysis all season with Boise State. When in doubt, even if he's not having a great game, he just has that opportunity to break one run off. He had 200-something rushing yards last week against Nevada. I think it ended up being like 210. I want to say 209. Okay, 209. 209 and 3 touchdowns. Just another typical Ashton Genty game. I think he'll be able to, kind of carve up that San Jose State defense. And if you're looking here for Boise State in terms of the regular season, this is their toughest game left. They go to Wyoming the following week, who is currently sitting at 2-7, and then they host Oregon State the Friday on Black Friday. So Boise State, if they get through this game, is looking pretty good the rest of the way. This isn't exactly an easy opponent, but I just think, once again, you have Ashton Genty and the other team doesn't. I'm going to take Boise State.
Yeah, some extra G5 talk I think was warranted, especially with Boise being back there in the spot this week as the 12 seed. Boise State looking like they're for sure in the driver's seat for that G5 burst, sitting at minus 350 at DraftKings now to make the playoff. Colorado State sitting at 4-0 in the Mountain West. Looks like they're going to be the likely opponent in the Mountain West title game, and we've seen Colorado State play. That game could be ugly. Boise State would be a double-digit favorite, I think, in that one. After this, Boise has Wyoming and Oregon State, as you were touching on. Should be 2 easy dubs. So I do think, as you were alluding to as well, this is the toughest matchup they have yet. San Jose State, another one of the kind of under-the-radar teams that's had a really good year. Their coach last year, Brennan, leaves for Arizona. They bring in the former Navy coach, Ken. I'm not going to even try to say his last name. But they're having a really good year here at 6-3. Probably another team that was expected to be a 2-3 win type of squad. But the former Navy coach, I think, knows a thing or two about stopping the run, defending the run, and having to scheme, having to play, having to practice against these unique kind of running styles. Has he ever seen an Ashton Genty type of running back? Probably not. And the San Jose State defense is not that great at stopping the run, a little bit below average at 75th in the country. But I expect them to have a few looks and a few kind of tricks up their sleeves to maybe throw Boise State's running game off a little bit. I know they're going to just feed Genty until the wheels come off. But if they're able to make Madsen throw the ball a little bit more and make the offense a little bit more one-dimensional with some kind of creative run defenses that he probably has up his sleeve, I think that they can make this game somewhat interesting. But I do think at the end of the day, Genty is a little bit too much, kind of like Derrick Henry, where he's just going to have a big play, a big run late in the fourth quarter, just continue to wear you down until he's able to break one loose. So I'm going to go Boise State to win, but we'll take San Jose State to cover. I'll go 35-24. So San Jose State plus 13.5 and under 61.5. All right, second to last game of the night. I had a whole nice little written out spiel, was going to go off about good old Rocky Top in this one, but right before kind of we were getting set to record it, sounds like Nico is in the concussion protocol. Hasn't been ruled out yet, but anytime a player is ruled into the concussion protocol, you have to kind of take it with some hesitancy. And also, why would Georgia be a 9-point favorite over Tennessee if there wasn't some other kind of reason baked into the line there? Tennessee is the 7th ranked team in the country. They are the seeded 8th, though. If the playoff were to start today, they're at 8-1. They will travel to Number 12, Georgia, but the first team out through the G5 team sliding in. Georgia at 7-2, coming off the ass kicking that was down in Oxford, Mississippi last weekend. 7:30 kick on ABC. Georgia 9-point favorite. Over under is 48.5. Joe, do you like Georgia to win, even if Nico does play?
Yeah, with or without Nico, I like Georgia here big, 31-14. We've seen Kirby Smart get his guys to believe that they were getting picked to go 7-5 the year they smoked TCU in the national championship game. He gets his guys to believe in the fact that no one believes in them when everyone in the country believes in them. Now they're sitting here as the first team out, plummeted in the rankings. I was actually shocked with how far they fell, but I think that this is all bulletin board material. I think that Georgia's going to come out and smoke Tennessee, especially if Nico doesn't play. If Nico doesn't play, that game could get ugly, especially at home. It's a night game in Athens. I think Georgia wins. I have them winning 31-14. I'm going to take them to cover the 9 points here. I'm going to go with the under 48.5. Georgia might get near 48 on their own potentially. I just think Tennessee's going to struggle to score. I know their defense has been awesome this year, but especially if you don't have Nico there and you're going with your backup, they're going to have a tough time moving the ball. I think this could get ugly. You could see a bunch of short field situations for Georgia. So it'll be one of those games where, the defense only gave up like 280 yards, but because of the short field, Georgia ended up scoring at will. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs here in a resounding win in a game that will end up pushing them back into the playoffs and where they will stay for the rest of the season.
I'll go on my whole spiel and rant and just hope and pray that Nico plays. But Georgia only 2-7 against the spread this year. And besides the Texas game where it was really the defense that dominated in that one, because the offense still didn't play well. Carson Beck had 3 turnovers in that game. What have they done to deserve to be a 9-point favorite? I think they have to know that Nico is going to be out with a number that big, because obviously that's a big factor if their star quarterback's not playing. But also, is Georgia just this big of a favorite because of the Kirby Smart factor, getting them to bounce back? Georgia's 12-3 straight up after a loss under Kirby Smart and 9-6 against the spread after a loss, if you want to kind of take that into account as well. My stance, though, on this game, Joe, is with Tennessee's defense being as good as it is, I think even if Nico's out, it won't allow them to get blown out unless their backup quarterback is going out there and turning the ball over left and right. I'm definitely taking that defense on Tennessee that we saw in person, that I've watched countless times this season, especially up front on the defensive line. Take them 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10 over the Georgia offense led by Carson Beck right now. Tennessee hasn't allowed 20 or more points in any game this season. Beck's going to cough it up at some point. I think you just have to make them pay, especially if Nico's not playing. You got to hope those are in some kind of short field type situations, as you were talking about on the other side. If Carson Beck's able to cough it up and Tennessee's able to make this game really ugly, Dylan Sampson might have to carry the ball 35, 40 times in this game. It's funny enough to say that, but that could be the realistic expectation. That's their kind of path to win. Regardless if Nico plays or not, I love the under in this game. But for shits and giggles, recording this on Tuesday night, we don't know if Nico's going to be playing or not. Obviously, Saturday's a long ways away. Might not even know until Saturday when they go out for warm-ups. But I'll just go with the Vols. I'll go 23-20, Tennessee +9, under 48.5. I say Georgia gets sent home packing. They finish the year 9-3, and Tennessee punches their ticket to the playoff on Saturday night. All right, final game of the week. I had another conference title prediction here. Clinching scenario. Okay. So we go to 3-6 Kansas, who's playing really well at number 6 BYU. They're seeded 3rd as the current top team in the Big 12. They're at 9-0, 10:15 kick on ESPN. BYU's a 3.5-point favorite, over under 55.5. BYU clinches a spot in the Big 12 title game with a win versus Kansas and losses by Arizona State, who plays Kansas State, as we talked about, Iowa State, who I'm not sure who they play off the top of my head, and West Virginia if they lose to Baylor. And also for the Mountain West, Boise State clinches a spot in the Mountain West title game with a win versus San Jose State, and UNLV lost against San Diego State as well.
I'm going to go with BYU here, 35-27. taking the cover to 3.5. I'm going to take the over in this game. BYU, I'm giving them all the props in the world for coming back and winning that game. I know they got a crazy holding call, which was a holding call as much as Utah fans want to bitch and moan about it. That's one of the craziest rivalry games. We talked about it last week. They fucking hate each other, Utah and BYU. They despise each other. So I don't care how good or bad Utah is. It is the old cliche, kind of like throw the record books out when these two teams play. I think that was a really gutsy, impressive win by BYU. I know they've had a bunch of close calls this year. I'm not trying to take away from that, but I think last week was really impressive. And now you're coming home against a Kansas team who's coming off a big win, but now they have to go on the road. I think BYU is going to win a game that's going to be closer than the records say they should be. I still think they'll cover that 3.5. But I just think BYU and Retzlaff is just a fantastic story. I think Kalani Sitake is a great football coach. We talked about it last week. He's been at BYU. It seems like forever now. And they're just continuing to chug along, now sitting at number 6 in the country, seeded number 3. If the results ahead of them go as I think they're going to go, they could end up being number 3 on their own and not even having to worry about people saying, oh, you're only seated here because of the fact that you're a conference champ. If they keep going the way they go, they could very easily end up being in the top 4 regardless. So shout out to BYU. I think they could win another close game here and set up a massive one with Arizona State next week.
Yeah, a BYU Colorado Big 12 title game to be one of the top 4 seeds in the college football playoff. that would be college football at its finest.
Oh yeah.
But I do think this BYU team is playing with their food a little too much. We both had Utah winning outright last week on the picks, but obviously they covered the spread, only losing by 1. But they're a team that's been playing with their food a little bit too much. They better be careful of no slip-ups because they got really no room for error. The Big 12 going to be a one bid league at the end of the day. Sorry, Joe, if you said all these as well, but BYU 6-0, Colorado 5-1. Iowa State at 4-2, Kansas State at 4-2, Arizona State at 4-2, and West Virginia at 4-2 are all still mathematically alive in the Big 12 title race. BYU still has to go to Arizona State, which we talked about. Not an easy team right now. Scadabo's playing, and then they host Houston to end the year, which should be a win, but no cupcakes really, and especially with the way BYU I think has been playing recently. They've been escaping games, and they're kind of giving me vibes of like the Vikings. Sounds weird, but from 2 years ago that won all those crazy one-score games, and then they go to the playoffs and they lost to Daniel Jones and the Giants. Is BYU going to be that team that wins the Big 12, but then they go and get rolled by whoever their first opponent is? I think there's a good chance they're like a double-digit dog to maybe like an Ohio State if they were the team that they would meet up with in like that 5-4 game or something like that. BYU definitely has that kind of feel about them that they could be that team that gets embarrassed come the playoff. But this spread is telling me that Vegas doesn't love the Cougars, and they really haven't in the past couple of weeks. And they could be right for an upset after narrowly defeating Utah. But I'll go with just they know how to win close games. They're not a dominant team, but they just know how to win games. They find ways to win. And they can win in multiple ways. They can win with defense. They can win with scoring. I think that they find a way to get this one done at home. I think is a big factor as well. All of them 27-21. So BYU minus 3.5 and under 55.5 hitting there. All right, final 2 picks of the week. Dog of the day, lock of the week. Wake Forest, my dog of the day, man, last week, +7. The quarterback, I think it was the quarterback slid. All the running back had to do on the next one was just fall down inbound or something. Instead, he runs off for a touchdown, and Wake Forest does not cover against Cal. Bad beat there. My dog of the day this week, I'm going to go with a team that we just mentioned that is still alive in the Big 12 title race with West Virginia. They're sitting at 4-2 in the conference. I'm going to take them +2.5 this week at home against Baylor. Baylor is 3-3 in the conference, so they are out of the Big 12 title race. This game means a lot more to West Virginia. Baylor has the chance to play spoiler there. But West Virginia, they're an up-and-down team. But when you get them at home, still their ability to run the football, I think, and against a Baylor team that doesn't have as much to play for, I think West Virginia for sure is a live dog in this one. I'm going to have them winning that game and keeping their name alive in the Big 12 title race. So West Virginia +2.5 is my dog of the day for this week.
So I'm trying to get a winner here. We talked about it. I've been cold. Last week was a joke. This week I am going to go with Florida plus 4.5 at home against LSU. 3:30 game on ABC. We've talked about Florida a lot, how tough their schedule's been. They're sitting at 4-5. They're most likely going to hit their over. I know this is a tough game against LSU, but you look at the fact that they have Florida State still on their schedule, they should be able to get to at least 5 wins, which is really impressive. The fact that they hit the over at all with that schedule. But this is a game. LSU is in a very interesting position. Your last 2 games, you've been embarrassed. You were embarrassed at A&M. You were embarrassed at home. You're seeing the governor of Louisiana is calling out Brian Kelly and the LSU Tigers. Brian Kelly is a very hated man. I got the full Brian Kelly experience when he was at Notre Dame. Now he is at LSU, where the fans are kind of done with his bullshit. He has that loss to USC at the beginning of the season, back-to-back embarrassing weeks. Now you have to go to Florida, a team that's kind of, got nothing to lose. And LSU, this seems like a very big quit spot. This could be a game. And if Florida were to pull off this upset, you could see Brian Kelly potentially fired after this game. Even though LSU is still sitting there, at 22nd in the rankings.
LSU could still go to the title game too.
Which is just crazy to me. There's so many teams. But it's funny, based on tiebreakers, ESPN has them at 8th in the conference right now, which is kind of crazy how they're still alive for the conference title game. I think LSU is done. Last 3 games, if they do win this game, they'll probably be sitting at 9-3. But if they somehow make it to the SEC title game, I think the bet of my life might be against them. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think Florida wins the game outright, but I definitely love them plus 4.5. I think LSU might be done. I don't know how Brian Kelly can really rally those guys after back-to-back embarrassing weeks. You put up that performance against Alabama coming out of a bye week. I mean, the vibes are terrible right now at LSU, and I think they're going to lose at Florida.
All right, and our lock of the week. My lock of the week, I'm going USC, Nebraska under 50.5. I think 2 programs that are in a bit of disarray right now. I was really low on USC coming into the year. They're making me look smart, but I was really high on Nebraska. And Joe, we're at a point where Nebraska, if they don't win this game, I don't know if they're going to be bowl eligible. I think the last game of the year is Purdue. They should beat them, but they were sitting there at like 5-1, I think, or 4-1 at least, and now they have a real legit chance to not get to 6 wins and not go to a bowl game again since 2016. But all that aside, my lock of the week, USC, Nebraska under 50.5. 2 programs that I said are in disarray right now, especially both on the offensive side of the ball. And you never think you would say that with Lincoln Riley. But a stagnant offense for Nebraska. They bring in Dana Holgerson off the street. He's going to be calling plays this week. Hasn't been a part of the program the entire season, the entire summer. It's an ultimate panic move, desperation move. Just a brand new voice. Who knows? Maybe he works some wonders, but I doubt it's going to click in week 1. USC turning to their backup quarterback in Miava as well, benching Miller Moss. It's just 2 teams that are pulling all the strings right now, and not much has been working. So I think we get some ugly, ugly football this week in Southern Cal. Nebraska still has a pretty solid defense to back on. So I'll go Nebraska, USC under 50.5 as my lock of the week.
So, Coyle, real quick with Nebraska, their last 3 games of the season, at USC, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa.
Oh, it's Iowa the last game. I thought it was Purdue, the rivalry game.
They already beat Purdue 28-10, which is gross as it is, only beating Purdue 28-10.
That was close at halftime, I remember.
They were 5-1. They beat Colorado. I remember everyone thought Nebraska was back. Everyone thought Nebraska was going to win it all. Bad right now. But they almost beat Ohio State. Nebraska, weird team.
Doesn't make sense.
No, and once again, you look at that win over Colorado. If you told Colorado fans after that game where they would be right now versus where Nebraska would be, I don't think even the craziest Colorado fan would, and even the most pessimistic Nebraska fan would believe that.
Yeah, both of them have gone in the complete opposite directions. Like you thought Nebraska was ready to take off and Colorado was about to plummet.
No, it's insane. That is crazy to look back at now. But for my lock of the week, I'm going to continue to kind of go off of vibes. I'm going to go with South Carolina minus 12.5 against Missouri. I'm sorry, but after Drinkowitz was lucky to beat Oklahoma, and he was like, "We're staying in the playoff hunt." That's right, I said playoff hunt, and like ran off. I could just see now all the memes of like South Carolina smashing them at home because it's a South Carolina team, a 4:15 home game. You have a ranked team coming to town, even though I don't think Missouri is one of the 25 best teams in the country. You still have a top 25 team coming to town. And even though you're not alive for the SEC championship game, with their schedule having Missouri and Clemson, who are both ranked teams ahead of them, and I was seeing reports all day, of course, don't rule out a potential 3-loss, SEC team. I think they were kind of hinting at South Carolina, especially with, how their losses have been so close.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you never know. Crazier things have happened in sports. I can't say college football because it's the first year they're doing this kind of playoff. But this is a South Carolina team that's very much alive. They went in and took care of business against Vanderbilt, which in 2024 actually means something. They, that game was never a sweat, 28-7. They're rolling right now. I think this is a Missouri team that's been kind of scooting along, and they're, fake tough. I think Missouri's going to get smoked. I love South Carolina minus 12.5. I just don't think Missouri's good, and it's been playing in my head on loop all week. That's right, I said playoff, and I just can't get it out of my head. Brady Cook has been disappointing if he even comes back. Is he done for the season?
Who knows? The college, that's my most biggest gripe with college football, like the injury report. It's terrible. They just say, like Cam Rising all last year, he's day to day. He missed the entire season.
Yeah, that was bad. That one was real bad. But then, Drew Pine sucks. He sucked when he was at Notre Dame. He, shout out Drew Pine. He is from Connecticut, but I mean, he's been terrible. Like he had 143 yards passing against Oklahoma in a game they almost blew. And especially if he starts going into South Carolina, I think the Gamecocks are going to take care of business. I love the 12.5. I feel real good about that play this week. Gamecocks are my lock of the week.
All right. I like the Gamecocks as well. I thought that was a big number, though. But just mentioning Oklahoma, I remember I saw it when I woke up. I didn't remember tweeting it, but I tweeted at 1:30 a.m., how does Brett Venables still have a job, with a picture of a Hillary Duff song. So that's what I think about before going to bed.
The poison.
On Saturday night. But that's my best take of the season. I said that in like week 3. So we're going to look back and be like, how the hell was Oklahoma number 15 in the country? And look where they are now. They've fallen off a cliff. I don't think he should have a job either, but you gave him an extension and he might be screwed. All right, but that'll do it for week 12. Joe promises to go better than 2-18 this week. We will hold it to it. What will you do if you go 1-19 or 0-20? Will you give yourself a punishment?
I'll retire for the show. I don't know. I'm not going to be like the Florida State dog poop guy who hasn't eaten the dog poop still, and Florida State is terrible now because of it.
Who's Florida State's win? Charleston Southern.
They beat Cal 13-9. That was the game I actually said. I think they were my lock of the week that week. Florida State. I said I loved that play. That was their only win. That's. And it looks like Norvell is going to keep his job, which is insane.
Because he got the contract with the Bama rumors.
Yeah. Bad down in Tallahassee.
All right. Hopefully we have some fun games this week with the not very appetizing schedule, but just another Saturday of college football. Make sure to enjoy it. We'll be back next week breaking down more playoff rankings, more important games, and another week closer to the playoff.